Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode, a new episode of the Fitness Manager's Report. We stream this live on YouTube, and then we will share the recording of this video to our podcast as well. So you can either watch and listen or just listen wherever you tend to absorb your content as a fitness manager. And today I am so excited to meet with Amanda Young, who I had the pleasure of meeting with and attending a session with at Idea World 2023. And she's agreed to be on today to kind of almost recap the session that I attended when it came to developing signature formats was her session. And we have talked about this before on this channel with other presenters and other providers, but I couldn't help but notice how different the way she approached offering signature formats was. And I think in this world, we're all trying to start to, with this, in this new world, we say, right? that we're starting to really start to tap into, the talent that we have and the creativity that we have to offer to potentially start building our own offerings. So as always, I would highly recommend to check out everything about Amanda Young, everything she's been up to, her wonderful story in the fitness industry. And maybe she'll share a little bit about that today. But she had a session that shared 5 steps to creating and in confidence creating our own successful signature classes and sessions. So I have 3 questions, since that's kind of the format of this podcast, that I have prepared for her that really, like I said earlier, highlighted what I felt made her process different, that will hopefully help you as you start to think about the programs you already have or new programs that you're thinking of offering for signature programs. So thank you so much again, Amanda, for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So my first question for Amanda is, one of the important elements that you highlighted in your session was the importance of knowing your story. And if you could share more on why that's important and how to tap into that authenticity, that would be great.
Yeah. It is interesting. I do take a little bit of a different stance than you normally hear in group fitness. And I think some of that has to do with the fact that I'm a licensed social worker. So I see fitness as a much more holistic experience. And so, I think that the reality is that when we're developing this authentic voice of who we are and who we want to be, or what we want our program to look like, that it really requires us to cultivate this strong sense of identity. And that identity is rooted in not only what we value, but really something meaningful in the work that we want to do. And so for me, like that is developed from our story. And I think every one of us has a story. And that story is something that happened to you that impacted the way you see life. It changed you and so deeply that it helped to define the person that you are today, both as an individual and a professional. And so for me, I feel like that story is really important in identifying sort of the values that you want to have and the impact you want to make. And that story is often rooted in something like trauma or struggle, but it's signified by, perseverance, strength, resilience. And so I think that when you're starting your programming or you're creating your own brand in your business, that story is integral into understanding who you are as a person and the impact that you want to make. And so, I think that owning your story is really important, and loving yourself through that process of being able to own it. And so when you're asking me, like, how do we develop authenticity? It's really about acknowledging sort of those external and internal sort of processes and experiences that we have, so just being able to be courageous and sharing that story, and being able to, whether it be like actually telling your own personal story, or how you came to be where you are, or really in the work that you're doing, and having the story itself influence sort of the work that you put forth. And so I think the other piece to how you can sort of develop this authentic voice is to really define and embrace not only your strengths, but the things that, as humans, we're wired for struggle. And so the things that you struggle with, I think, is also really important. And the more sort of vulnerable you are, and the more you're able to express that vulnerability, I think what happens is that you silently give permission for the for your clients, for your participants, members in your studio, to really do the same, be themselves authentically and vulnerably.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's where it's so different from what I've heard from other places. They're like, okay, creating a signature format. Think about the equipment you have to offer and the space that you have and and I just loved how much deeper you took it and in describing all of that was wonderful. So I think what is interesting about the audience I work with is that you watching this or listening to this might be a fitness manager for a studio, and your studio may have a story, and then you as an instructor could also tap into your own story, depending on the format you're creating for that studio. And then as a manager of a larger health club, could you follow those steps or listen to exactly what Amanda was explaining, in how to not create your story, but tap into your story, because I love that you shared that it provides permission for the people in your classes to feel more, to, be okay with being more vulnerable, because that's how we help with behavior change. That's how we help people feel more comfortable to enter our spaces in general. If we're just the perfect shiny object in the front of the room, that's not going to that's not going to help anyone be able to show their own vulnerability. And I think we put so much pressure on ourselves in the industry to be that person. So I love that. I love how you describe that.
Yeah, I mean, you said it really perfectly. I think that as fitness professionals, as fitness managers, like, in a way, we are put on a pedestal, right? Like, people look to us to be the experts. People look to us to be these, I in a way, it's we have this honor and a responsibility to really be not just somebody that has the answers, but somebody that's also human. And I think really in fitness, we're really not just about fitness, we're about the human experience, right? And so when we're able to actually be human and to express those emotions and vulnerabilities that we have, then it feels more connected. And really, that's what fitness is. It's not just about our bodies, but it's really about, like, our mind, our spirit, and that connection. So, like, not to say that all of those other things that we do when we put a program aren't important. They are, like,
Yeah.
like your templates and all of that is very important.
Yeah.
But the reality is like, we're still about connection, right? We're wired for connection. We're wired for belonging. And that's the space that most of us, when we get into the fitness industry, that's what we want, right? We want to help people. And in order to be able to help people, we have to be able to connect with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that should be like a shirt, by the way. Like, in order to help
It.
people, we need to be able to connect with them. Like that. That's the quote of this video. The next question I have for Amanda was based on really her communication styles that she had identified that make certain experiences unique. And so if you don't mind just kind of just brushing over those different unique communication styles and why those need to be considered when creating a new signature format.
Yeah, thank you. So, like I said, we talk so much about being human and being able to connect, and connecting means communicating. And in fitness, that's what we do, right? We're communicators. We're communicators all the time. And so, when we look at how we communicate, we recognize that sometimes the way that we communicate might not be the way that people understand or are comfortable with. And so, I did break down the 4 types of communication styles. So The first one is the analytical communicator. So if you're an analytical communicator, you're somebody that really enjoys like numbers and data. And so if that's who you are, you might gravitate towards a type of like signature format that is based on data. So heart rate training, RPMs, VO2 max, like that type of stuff will be something that you might be gravitating towards. And so what's great about analytical communicators is this idea that, they're valued for their expertise and their objectivity, but they tend to be aversive to like emotional words. And so if you have somebody who really wants to develop deep connection with their fitness instructor or their trainer or their fitness manager, then that can be a challenge for an analytical communicator, right? And so then you have the intuitive communicator. The intuitive communicator is all about like the big picture. And so they don't get bogged down in details. They really just want to focus on the end goal. And so people like that tend to be more interested in formats that might like be more flowy or be less rigid in their structure. And what's great about the intuitive communicator is that they don't get bogged down with details, right? They just see the big picture and they can envision like what they're really looking for and what their overall goal is. But the challenge is that if you have somebody that really likes the details, likes to know exactly what's happening and when, then you might not be able to capture their attention. And then the opposite again of the intuitive communicator is the functional communicator. And the functional communicator is all about plans and processes, step by step. They like the details. They like things in linear order, right? And so if you tend to be a functional communicator, you're somebody that might like the types of classes that allow you to create very structured formats that give you that time to, let's say, describe exactly every step of how to do a burpee. And so, you might be very interested in those types of formats that maybe are a little more complex, that give you an opportunity to really explore and explain every detail. And so what's great is that functional communicators have an immense attention to detail, which is awesome. But if you have a room full of intuitive communicators, then you might lose them because you're focusing so much on details and they just want the big picture. And then the last is the personal communicator, which is something that I vibe very closely with. And functional communicators are all about creating and sustaining relationships. They care about what people think and what people feel. And so they might gravitate towards formats that involve teamwork or formats that invite some type of collaboration throughout the workout. And so, personal communicators are great. They're able to connect deeply with their members, their participants, the people that they serve. But the challenge is, let's say, if you have a room full of analytical communicators who are all about the data and don't do well with emotions, then you might be seen as like overly emotional and, not well versed or, in your field or whatever. And so when you're like creating programs, to me, it's like this idea of understanding the ways in which people communicate and the ways in which they receive what you say and what you do. It really matters.
Absolutely. And I almost think of not just when you're creating your signature formats, but like how well do you really know your instructors or your team as a manager? Like I mean, I encourage anyone who's listening to this to write down all four of those characteristics, those types of communicators. And it kind of taps into even how they think and digest information, like you said. So you could learn as a manager how to better manage your team if you understood really who these people are. And I think I can't help but think right away, like so many yoga teachers I know who are the more intuitive type
Yeah.
of instructor. That's definitely generalizing them, but that's That's what I tend to think of immediately when you describe it. But what I love is you described the strengths of all of them, because I think instead of knowing yourself as a communicator, like maybe I feel like I'm more functional personally.
Mhm.
But when you get to understand yourself, it's making sure you understand also the benefits of the other communicators, not necessarily that anyone's right or wrong in how they decide to communicate with their classes, because it's they all have value. Like you brought up every value for each one, and that was so helpful. So I think, yeah, tapping into that as a manager, potentially for your own leadership improvement, would be great. And then after you write down all of those communication styles, start to get curious about which instructors on your team might fit that type of communication style. And then I think working with them, like you described, to fine tune how they can really embody that and almost embrace it. Yeah,
Yeah.
who they
It's
are.
funny because, it's true. It's like we interface with people all the time. And as managers, as I used to be a group fitness manager, it was it's a lot of personality, and it's a lot of figuring out, right, the ways in which people can hear the feedback or be able to really absorb what you are saying. And so you're right. I mean, the reality is that we are at different times and in different situations, different types of communicators. Like we tend to gravitate towards one, but
Yeah.
depending on the scenario, we might be a different type of communicator. Like I'm definitely a different communicator, in my fitness life versus like speaking with my partner or, my friends sometimes, right? And so,
Yeah.
um, understanding that as a manager and being able to like understand what and how people that I'm managing can really understand and listen to be able to really like understand them will
Mhm.
help us to better communicate like what we want to do in order to help them. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and then if you're working with those instructors, I feel like as an instructor, it would just be so nice. Let's say a manager approaches you about a signature format. You talk about, as we talked about, the, equipment, location, the
Right.
more logistics of it, then you get into the story, and then you start to actually tap into how they communicate. And I think even for some instructors, that would be so insightful for them to go, "Oh, I've never," they may not have ever realized they have a certain type of communication style they lean toward more. And I think just that knowledge in general will help, I think, instructors grow and
Yeah.
improve their communication. So I love all of that. The last question I have for, and again, it's just tapping into her knowledge and how she, considers signature formats. But in her session, she provided such great visual representations of class formats. And I tend to be very much like a list type of a person or a block kind of a person. And the way that Amanda had shared with us, the different formats she created, they were in kind of a timeline format. They were in color coded formats. There were different shapes of how to describe, what the format needs to look like. So if you can do your best, I know we don't have necessarily the visual tools right now, but do your best to kind of explain what your thought process was when you were building those visuals. That would be great.
Yeah, it's so funny because you said you were a like more functional communicator, and that those developing those templates are it's a very functional communicator.
That's my thing, is the templates. I'm all about the templates.
And they're very important, right? Because the idea of building that template means that it makes it a lot easier for you to plug and play, right? So you can continue to use that template. And so this is where, as a personal communicator, the functional communicator comes out in me, right? Because I actually really enjoy it. But in the same way that we're different types of communicators, we're also very different types of learners. And I'm actually a visual learner. And so when I am creating like a template for a class, I actually need to visually represent it so that I can understand it better. And so, yeah, it's hard to really describe the templates per se, but for me, I think of different types of classes in different ways. And so when I think of like a more rhythmic based type class, I think of it as linear because it evolves in a linear fashion, right? You're building upon choreography, or you're building, as you go along. And so to me, it does feel very linear. And so I graphically express it as like a linear concept. And then, there were other more interval based type classes. And so for me, it was like, in trying to describe like a pyramid, I actually have to draw the pyramid, and each level has a different color associated with, what plane of motion you're in, or what's the joint action. And so, it's kind of hard without having the visual to be able to explain to everybody exactly the way I do it. But I think that the idea is that, like, as we are all different types of learners, like, for me, if it's written just down as like, a long block of going down, I can't visualize it in the same way. And so I need to have colors that represent certain things, and I need to have it to visually look like the way I want it to feel. If that even
Mhm.
makes sense, like it needs to
Yeah.
feel the way it looks.
Hmm. Absolutely. I think that really is helpful. And as much as, like you said, it's challenging for us to share that. But I think, yeah, like you said, linear interval, using colors as maybe a way, like as far as intensity or a feeling that people are having. I think that is just those different layers of potential ways to help those formats look more visual, because that's where I think I've gone wrong as a manager. I've created formats, but I've created them in this very like wordy, typed up, like very list oriented. Like it looks like a list, and it's really hard to, like you said, define or get a feeling from that list. And then when you look at something that has arrows and the colors change as the arrows progress, and then there's description, there's a more blanket statement description in those boxes or categories during class. I think that helps the instructor also not feel like it's too rigid. If I
Yeah,
gave them just a list of exercises, that's more rigid than saying plane of motion. There's probably a million other things they might come up with, but it still follows that same formula of, okay, this is the plane we're moving through. So it's more of a general concept, but it gives
yeah,
them, and it also probably helps them understand more if you can make it as visual as possible. Like you said, the feeling, the journey that they're taking the
yeah.
classes through and what it should look like.
And I also think too that, as fitness managers, like if we're as an owner of a studio or a fitness manager creating these programs, if we're giving them to instructors, especially seasoned instructors who are really creative, and we're telling them you have to do it exactly this way and do these exact exercises, it kind of takes the creativity away from instructors. And I think that when you're giving them more like plane of motion, joint action, which follows the format and exactly what you envision, right, for the format itself, then it gives them the ability to create
Mhm.
within the structure and the template that you have. And so it gives them a little more autonomy, and then it feels more authentic to who they are, right? Because when then now we're going back to authenticity, but
Yeah.
it gives them the room to be
Yeah.
more authentic, rather than it be like I'm a robot and I am doing what my manager told me to teach, right? It gives them that feeling that they can own it.
Hmm.
And when you give instructors that ability and that creativity to really own something, then they can do some really amazing things with it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And the cool thing is, like, you may have that veteran instructor who feels and knows, they like see that template and they're like, I'm gonna rock this and it's gonna be my own thing. And
Yes.
then you have a newer person who sees that and goes, I need help. You can still help them, but it's
Right.
almost it's almost worse in a way if you make it too rigid, for the person who's like, I can do this. Like, you gotta just trust me. Like, I got this. And then you're always giving each other feedback and improving, of course, but I think that is just such a great way to kind of describe how to make that happen for instructors. But any other thoughts? Those are all the questions I have for you, but any other thoughts, Amanda, as you think about or describe building and generating and developing a new signature format?
I think that the only thing I really always tend to come back to is this idea of um like being able to really know, I think, know what you value, right? Really be getting clear on what your values are and what is the added value that you want to bring to your fitness community. Because I think that signature formats, obviously have to fall within like what equipment you have, what space you have. Like there are a lot of logistical things, but the bottom line is like what motivates people to come to your class is not just the value, the added value that you have, that you're creating, that's missing, but also like you as a person and who you are and the value that you bring. And so really just being able to understand that concept of value, not just from a practical sense, but really like who you are as a person and what you bring. And I think when you get really clear on that, people come because that it's you, it's not just the format, it's who you are as a person.
That is so amazing. That is so true. That's kind of the differentiator. I totally I love it. I'm so glad you mentioned that. So everyone, again, maybe just record that section. We'll put it on a t-shirt as well. Value. You are the value that you bring to your classes. That's so great. So thank you so much again, Amanda, for joining us for this episode, and we will continue to bring you more episodes. If you enjoyed today's video slash podcast, wherever you're absorbing the content, please be sure to like the video, potentially subscribe to the channel on YouTube so we know you're enjoying content like this. And just a quick plug and reminder that the Fitness Manager course has launched. And so I will be actually creating a webinar and some recordings on the course so more people can kind of see what exactly it looks like. And one thing I'm going to talk about that I think really kind of ties into this concept is how to make good class descriptions because that is tough. They have to be short enough for people to read them, but robust enough for people to understand what's going to happen. So hopefully that's a good kind of addition to the education that Amanda shared with us today. But we appreciate all of you that are listening, and thank you again, Amanda, for your time.